Hello, this is Dave Sugarbaker, and today is the last Sunday of February. It's the 25th of February in 2024, and I have a psalm that's not from the book of Psalms. This is from 1 Chronicles 16. Sing to the Lord, all the earth, tell of his salvation from day to day. Declare his glory among the nations, his marvelous works among all the peoples. For great is the Lord and greatly to be praised. He is to be revered above all gods. For all the gods of the peoples are idols, but the Lord made the heavens. Honor and majesty are before him, strength and joy are in his place. Ascribe to the Lord, O families of the peoples. Ascribe to the Lord glory and strength. Let the sea roar and all that fills it. Let the field exult and everything in it. Then shall the trees of the forest sing for joy before the Lord, for he comes to judge the earth. O give thanks to the Lord, for he is good, for his steadfast love endures forever. The reading today is a Psalm of David, but it doesn't appear in the book of Psalms. Part of this psalm seems to be borrowed from two other psalms in the book of Psalms, but it doesn't appear the way I read it in any other place other than in 1 Chronicles, where David is doing some things and he happens to come out with this psalm that he's written. David was an extremely gifted individual who rose to power in ancient Israel at exactly the right time. He very likely changed the course of Western civilization. He was that outstanding. As a young man, he was a musician in the court of King Saul, who was the first king of Israel. David had an up-close and personal relationship and an understanding of Saul, and for Saul it was a kind of a love-hate relationship. The prophet Samuel had anointed Saul as the king of Israel. Saul saw David's gifts and hated him for all of it. Saul himself was bipolar, and his mental illness eventually destroyed him. On the other hand, David's star was rising. David was driven from the king's court by Saul. David would never do anything to harm Saul, who was the anointed king, and yet Saul continually tried to kill David, whom he saw correctly as the likely contender for the throne. As Saul's mental illness progressed, Samuel the prophet stepped in to anoint David as king. This is while Saul was still occupying the throne, and that just poured fuel on the fire. It just added to the enmity between these two. The Philistines, during the time of David and Saul, were a thorn in the side of Israel. They were a subset of the Phoenician peoples, and the Phoenicians had settled along the coasts of the Mediterranean, and Israel was inland from the Mediterranean in the hill country of Palestine. The Philistines were using Iron Age technology. The Jews were still living in the Bronze Age. And if you put bronze weapons up against iron weapons, iron always wins. Both David and Saul led armed groups against the Philistines. In Israel, there was a saying at the time, Saul has killed his thousands and David his 10,000s. The difference was that David had gone on an espionage mission into Philistine territory. He had pretended he was crazy, And the Philistines kind of left him alone in what they saw as his craziness. And he stole the secrets of iron-making technology from the Philistines. He takes his knowledge back to his troops in Israel, and he and his troops wind up fighting with iron weapons. They leveled the playing field between the Israelis and the Philistines, at least as far as David was concerned. Saul was still fighting in the Bronze Age. David was a great military leader, and ultimately he subdued the Philistines and most of Israel's other regional competitors. During the period of competition with King Saul, David and his army robbed from the rich and gave to the poor. He was a couple thousand years ahead of Robin Hood, but he was tremendously popular with the general population. As king, David reunited the north and southern parts of Israel, the United Kingdom of Israel. He defeated all of Israel's regional competitors. He established a new capital city at Jerusalem. He ordered the compiling or the writing of the scrolls that became the backbone of the Old Testament, the first 5 books. He brought the Ark of the Covenant, the most sacred object in Israel, to his new capital city, Jerusalem. David set up the conditions for building the temple, although the actual build was done by his son Solomon. And in the meantime, in his spare time, David wrote much of the hymn book that has been used by the Jews for the last 3,000 years. That's the book of Psalms. David was a pivotal, powerful figure. Now I'd like to shift gears. In the last few weeks, I have been struggling. I've felt grumpy and negative. And I think part of the cloud over my head has been due to 2 rounds of steroids to fight off a bout of asthma. I approve of modern medicine, but sometimes I don't like the side effects. So I feel grumpy. Now, I've invested a lot of effort in being a positive, glass half full person. And so I'm concerned that I feel negativity creeping in around the edges. I find myself talking back to the television set, for instance. I'm just hoping that grumpy is not a side effect of getting older. I'm irritated by self-serving politicians who, it seems to me, spin in ignorance. They seem to believe that lying long enough and loud enough should somehow transform the lie into truth. I hate to see misinformation take root and grow. It just doesn't seem right. I heard from a news program that singing in a choir increases your generosity. It'll also heighten your sense of gratitude. I hadn't thought of it this way, but when in church we sing a hymn together, that may have a hidden benefit. Perhaps we all feel our spirits lighten at least a little bit when we make music together. But one thing I do know is that you can't worship grumpy. It's a contradiction. David writes in that psalm that I was reading earlier on, he writes about all creation acknowledging and worshiping God. Let the sea roar and all that fills it. Let the field exult and everything in it. Then shall the trees of the forest sing with joy. You can roar, you can exult, you can sing, but you can't worship and grump at the same time. Gratitude is part of worship, and that thankfulness for me is central to living abundantly. Gratitude counterbalances my grumpiness when I encounter things like stupidity and greed. A man comes to Jesus with a request that Jesus heal his son, who is demon-possessed. We don't know exactly what that means, but in Mark's gospel, it was important for Mark to establish that Jesus had power and control over evil spirits. The man says to Jesus, "If you are able to do anything, have pity on us and help us." And Jesus comes back at him and says, "If I am able, all things can be done for the one who believes." And the man comes right back at Jesus and he says, "I believe. Help my unbelief." This is an honest and concerned dad trying his best to get help for his son. And I identify with him in his dilemma. He knows that he has both belief and unbelief within himself. My version of this at the moment is, I want to live abundantly. Help me with my short-sighted grumpiness. Now, God bless you. Take care. I've got a cat who wants into the picture. What are you doing, kitty? In any case, take care of yourself, and if you find value in this, I'd appreciate it if you would pass it along. Thank you so much. See you soon.